Dean Davis Show, and we are lucky enough to be joined by one of the most talented people in Chicago, not women, people, and that is Leila Rahimi. You can always check her out on NBC Chicago Sports. She's going to be at the sideline with the Bulls. Maybe if baseball was in play, she'd be hosting baseball night in Chicago Nights again.
Yes, she would be.
But multifaceted, talented, witty individual. We have always enjoyed any type of correspondence we've had with her, and we appreciate you joining us this evening. Leila, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm thankful to be on with you guys. The mutual respect is the same. I love the show. I feel like even when you're talking to each other and there's not a show, there's a show. So I'm glad to be
appreciate that. Yeah.
All right, Leila, let's start off with one question that we had a debate. Now, all of us grew up in Chicago, but I tend to go with Casey Johnson because when any of us do an interview and someone has a name, usually before you go live, you ask them what their name and how to pronounce it. So are you going with the Arturas Karnisovas or Karnisovas? Or even if I'm pronouncing that right, how are we going to pronounce his name right during this interview?
Okay, I'm going to get real deep cut here. So I have a buddy who's Lithuanian. And he goes back to, he used to teach me the name, you remember Jojo Vicious?
Yes.
He's Lithuanian. But the way you're supposed to say his name is Eurovicious. Oh. So like if you go by that theory, then it's Karnisovas and not Karnisovas. So I'm going with Karnisovas, but I feel like it's something where we're going to have to get the technicality once we each talk to him in person. This is the same with Tomasz Sadaransky, by the way. And Sada's a really nice guy, and I was talking to him about it, and I'm like, dude, there's like 18 different ways of saying your name right now. And he's like, I'm okay with Thomas. And I'm like, not what you're okay with. I'm like, there are hockey players who play in this building when you guys aren't here. And he's like, yeah, that's true, Tomasz. And I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. So I say it's I say essentially Karnisovas, but I have a buddy who's Serbian, and he thought it was Karnisovas. But either way, we're going to get it right eventually. I would just like to talk to him in person to get the finer point. But I'm going with niche because of Joe Eurovicious.
And of course, everybody eventually is going to start calling him AK anyway. He's going to get a nickname.
Yeah, that's his nickname in Denver, is AK.
Okay. See, I thought we were just bringing that here, and I didn't want us to just be lazy. I prefer to try to get someone's name right because we did an interview yesterday and we said AK through the half of the interview until I finally said his name, and it's like, wait, y'all, we're going too far with this. So I think
we initially said
say that man's name. But look, all right, we got his name. So this is my first question for you. Initially, when you heard the list of candidates, which candidate did you prefer? I think down in Houston, perhaps you had a relationship with Arturas, but even outside of that, was there another candidate perhaps that you preferred and that you had learned something about that you thought would have benefited the Bulls as executive vice president?
Well, I just missed Arturas.
Okay.
Oh. Basically, he got there he left as I was getting there. But you all know I'm pretty pro the tree that Daryl Morey has in the NBA, and that includes Sam Hinkie, trust the process. But Gerson Rosas is another good example in Minnesota. AK is another good example. Morey's done work when it comes to the GM tree and his disciples all being out in the NBA. So I had just missed Arturas, but obviously I'm familiar with Morey's regime in Houston, so that was a good sign. Zanuck from the Jazz is a name I think we were all a little bit interested to see what was going to happen there because he also went through the interview process. And Donovan Mitchell links those two franchises in the Nuggets and in the Jazz. So you've got to like what the Jazz have done too as far as how they've built their team, especially given the tools that they've had. But when you hear about AK, one of the stances on him and what people say is that it was just a matter of time before he was going to run his own franchise. He interviewed for the Bucks and the Nets jobs, so you knew that he was in that running. So it was either going to be Zanuck or AK, in my opinion, in my estimation. And then once all the reports started coming out, Vinny Goodwill, I believe, was one of the first to say it was AK's to lose. And so that's what we're seeing now is he ended up being the guy.
Dean Davis, right now we have Leila Rahimi from NBC Sports Chicago. Leila, when you bring up Daryl Morey, and I'm a huge fan also, but the only question I have when we look at Arturas, will he do most of his work from an analytics point, like it seems like Daryl Morey, or is there a multifaceted factors as far as, the scouting, the feel, the touch and feel, the relationships with people more than just necessarily the numbers?
So what we've heard, and Morey talked about this as well, was that Arturas is collaborative. That was the scouting report we had on him. So he wasn't as much in the advanced analytics as he was the other sides to building a team through the draft, free agency, and then scouting. So trades as well. So from what we've heard, he's not as, I don't know, mad scientist is the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying. He's not as out there as Morey is. Like Morey's like, let's not have a center. So that experiment happened. I don't think that AK is that way. He is collaborative. He talks about filling in his weaknesses or trying to have a sort of balance to what each person brings in the front office. So I don't think we're going to see the lab as much as, say, it happened in Philly and in Houston, but we are going to see a little bit more presence than what we've seen in the past in that department.
I was worried about PJ Tucker playing the 5 for the Bulls, and that was basically the reason why I asked you.
I mean, that roster in Houston got real avant-garde. We've got to see how it's going to go down there.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, Leila, one question I had, kind of the debate we had on the show was just from your reporting and just hearing more about, I'm just going to call him AK. Do you think he's going to be more of a public face, or do you think his GM, whoever he decides to hire, is going to be more so of that guy out in the public, talking to the media, talking to the fans per se, and he's going to be in the back, kind of like, pulling the strings and making things happen?
It's an interesting question because of what happened in Denver. So we were told that AK wasn't as front-facing as Connolly in Denver. And Connolly was really more of the guy who faced the media a lot. And Denver is not Chicago when it comes to the expectation of the executive in a sports franchise outside of Ryan Pace for the media. So it's going to be interesting to see if he has somebody who's a little more media savvy come into that GM role, or a little more front facing, and he continues to be the guy who's not as upfront, or if he is a little more public presence filled here in Chicago. He did do a 15-minute interview with Casey Johnson. We have it on our website at NBCSportsChicago.com. So he's embracing that role. He knows he's got to talk to everybody, and he's being very upfront and honest in how he's doing it so far. So that might be a little bit different than what we saw out of him in Denver.
D and Davis show on the line with us. Feel like a radio show, but hey, you can watch us as well on YouTube. Talking to Leila Rahimi right here of NBC Sports Chicago. Speaking of the GM, do you have an idea or a guy you might like? You have Michael Finley, a hometown kid here in Chicago. You spent time in Philadelphia. You have Mark Eversley. Who do you think might be able to, have a leg up on the position?
Yeah, you mentioned Eversley in Philly, and his name is one that's getting brought up a lot. Mm-hmm. And why not? You've got to like what the Sixers have done in the past several years. Although there are people that argue Sixers team last year and 2 years ago was a little bit stronger than what they were working with in their current iteration. Mm-hmm. But Finley, I'm a Mavericks fan growing up. So, I have a soft spot in my heart for Michael Finley. Yeah. He was one of the bright spots in that franchise when there weren't a lot of bright spots to be had, and he was with them for those early playoff runs. Mark Cuban coming out and complimenting him in the way he did, I think says a lot. He wants to promote Michael Finley. Finley is a very well-respected guy. I was curious to see what was going to happen with Calvin Booth, but all indications seem that he's not going anywhere in Denver. So that was a question that we had. We already saw the hiring of Polk out of New Orleans, and his specialty is contracts. So we can kind of fill in the gaps to see what we might get out of a future GM on this team. But everybody was concerned about who was going to be running this thing. So that's number one. Yeah. And now we've just got to fill in the pieces from there.
Let me ask you this. What Bulls players do you think are going to benefit from the philosophies that Arturas has espoused as far as fast-paced and positionless basketball that are on the roster? And what Bulls players may not benefit moving forward?
Well, what's interesting is we've heard Jim Boylan himself talk about how he wants players to not be so married to a position on the court. This is not a new concept for the Bulls. So I think it's something that won't be as foreign of a concept. What is going to be interesting to me, and I'm sure you guys have thought this too, look at the passing that goes on in Denver and how they run their sets.
Yeah.
So is it going to be as much based on transition and getting out ahead and out in front like we've seen, or are there going to be more specific plays run? Are there going to be more sets? I don't think it's going to be the whole get the steal, get the rebound, run down, try to shoot that early in the shot clock. I think it's going to be making extra passes. And KC talked about this on the Bulls Talk podcast. He said, I think there's going to be a lot of Bulls who have guys with balls coming at their heads because they're not going to realize that there's going to be an extra pass thrown their way. So as to who that benefits, AK's already talked about the youth of this roster. So he's probably thinking about Daniel Gafford. He's thinking about Kobe White, and Kobe has fallen into that positionless role, if you will. Then you've got other players who, I don't know. I can't help but think that this is going to benefit Larry Markkinen. Don't you guys think it's going to?
Well, I wanted to. I was a huge fan of the Finnish Lord, as I dubbed him initially.
Now he's the Finnish Squire.
Yes, he's a squire. He's not a lord right now, but he can get his lordship back.
So this isn't like the traditional feudal system where you're just stuck.
No, it's not. This is no, not tradition. It's broken. This is broken. Of course, him being an international player, your first thoughts is, man, listen, this should benefit Laurie. But being a Bulls fan and going through some of the things that we're going through, I try not to get ahead of the cart. Basically, I try to slow my roll, because one of the questions I was going to ask you is, as a fan, should I trust this? It sounds good. It's great getting someone from outside of the system. We had a debate with a friend of ours who wanted BJ to be included in the process, and we kind of just like, listen, let's break the whole you have to know me thing that goes on with the Bulls when you see that philosophy-wise it's better in business to go out and get the best and brightest and not necessarily who you know. So I think so. But one thing you brought up, and it was from that Bulls Talk podcast with Tony, Jason, KC, and Schaefer, I believe. One of the things, Raj, and it's funny when you're saying that, and was talking to Fern and Djokovic, and on this team right now, with a team that you want, even though it's positionless, you want someone to get these guys in their sets. And in Denver, you're running the offense through Djokovic. And and that's such a unique player. You're not going to find a guy like that once in a generation. So now we're saying that to implement what perhaps his philosophy is, that he will have to go out and get a lead guard, it's a long stretch because I'm a Kobe White fan. They're going to press Kobe to be less combo and maybe a little bit more point guardy. What do you think?
Well, I think the initial impression when we all thought Kobe White was coming here was, I thought point guard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's safe to say that that's still a thought that can happen. And the Nuggets are really big on talent development, as we've seen their franchise prove, right? They get guys, they keep guys, they develop them. So, yeah, I think that Kobe is probably somebody you would mentally slate to be a point guard. Now, is that going to happen once they play this out? I think the big question here hinges on what happens with Jim Boylen.
Mm-hmm.
Because if Boylen's system is something that AK likes, then is it going to be similar to what we've seen previously or not? And one of the reports that came out, and this is the question that everybody has on their mind, and I hate to jump ahead of it, but to me, none of these questions about players and personnel get answered until you're trying to figure out what happens with the head coach and how he wants this system to go, right? So as long as that is still in question, and Michael Reinsdorf, Casey quoted him saying that AK has the chance to talk to Boylen now for hours, and AK has said that he wants to evaluate. So judging by both those things, you know that he's going to talk to Boylen. I'm assuming, safe to say, that this conversation was one that Michael Reinsdorf and AK had before he got hired, the evaluation of the head coaching position. It certainly seemed to be that way with the general manager spot. So if Boylen stays, are we going to see the same system out of Boylen? And if so, are we going to see the same system run by the players? So then you have to ask, is Larry going to benefit from that? But based on what we see in Denver, I don't know how you can't say that Larry would benefit from that system a little bit more than what he's in right now.
Leila, one question I was going to ask you was, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for AK since he's accepted the role? We talked about this also too. Joe Cowley put out the tweet, and you kind of alluded to it right here, that Boylen kind of has the ear or has the backing of a lot of people inside the organization. Now, we don't know where that's going to go, but hearing that, do you think it's going to be a challenge to move him out since he has a backing, or what do you think might be some possible challenges that lie ahead of him?
Okay, so we already know that this was probably discussed, right? So the question is, what happens from here about it? What is the actual action that takes place? So Michael Reinsdorf hired Jim Boylan. So do they keep him vis-a-vis what they're doing? That's the real question. So, I think Joe Kelly is correct. Like, he has people in his corner for a reason. You don't hire somebody and go out on that limb unless you believe in them, which was the same way for John Paxson and Gar Forman. I think we've seen a little bit of skepticism out of Bulls fans simply because John Paxson is still there. But Paxson willingly took a different role. He willingly stepped away and said as much to people. And I don't think that Arturas comes in, and you heard that phrase full authority that Woj used when this process really started to heat up. I don't think you get there and have the words full authority out there unless you're willing to give somebody full authority, whatever that may mean.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that one. I don't think he would have took the job and knowing that possibly he could have got undercut for the position. But if Boylan is gone, who do you think he might reach out to? You hear Adrian Griffin, a former Chicago Bull, is slated to be like the next up and coming head coach. But is anybody else out there that you have any interest for? You have any other names you've heard?
Well, there was the one that they just discussed, Fleming. So he just got hired. So that's somebody that AK wanted to bring on, and he helped him get hired in Denver. So that's somebody that he's brought in. So you have to ask, what is his full position going to be with this team? Adrian Griffin, people love him. People talk about him a lot and the potential that he would have to be a head coach. It's funny that you guys mentioned the whole BJ Armstrong situation, because I know you've probably heard the same theories I have that Tibbs might come back.
Yeah, been hearing that a lot now. Yeah.
But I also feel like Knicks fans are saying Tibbs. I feel like a lot of people in the NBA are saying Tibbs. What's unfortunate is I don't know that you can have that discussion yet because of what's going on in the NBA. You can't really move on a head coaching position until there's some conclusion that's made about this season. Right. So we might be waiting for a long time to figure out who the head coach of this team is going to be if there is a change. And even though they did the right thing at the right time and made the right move to get the executive in place, it still might be really complicated and really tough to try to see what happens in this time as far as evaluating coaching potential.
Then, Davis, right now we have Leila Rahimi from NBC Sports Chicago joining us talking about the Bulls and Arturas Karnisovas.
Hey.
All right. This is one question I have for you, and of course it's just what you expect. Usually with the Bulls, as far as drafting, they go for high floor guys to somewhat avoid risk. Can we expect that Arturas will be a tad bit more adventurous? You can kind of look at the Michael Porter Jr. drafting, but he kind of fell to them. And the value at 14 was great because he was almost the first pick in the lottery if he wasn't injured at Missouri. So do you look at the drafting as upcoming with the Bulls that there'll be some more risk taking and perhaps going for players that the old regime perhaps would have deemed too volatile, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the Bulls have gone with safe picks. Mm-hmm. If we can all kind of agree to that. They've gone to people who you would expect to see. But the difference is, who did the Nuggets trade with in that Doug McDermott deal?
Chicago Bulls.
The Bulls.
Yeah.
So, but the difference is the Nuggets hit on people. Mm-hmm. They hit on Nurkic. They've hit on all these guys in the draft. They had that capital in place, as we like to say, the personnel capital, to be able to take the risk because they could afford to sit Michael Porter Jr. out with that injury. They could afford to take the risk and just see what was going to happen to him. Unfortunately, we're still waiting to fully see what's going to happen with Michael Porter Jr. But I do expect there to be some risk taken as far as who they draft and how. It's going to look different, but they've got to take a little bit more risk and take a few more chances on players in the draft based on what they have right now. The bigger question, I think, is this is a big shift as far as the roster is concerned overall, because I know you guys know this. There's a lot of thought that the Bulls are pretty locked in as far as their roster was concerned, especially given their position in the standings right now.
Right.
We all know what that draft pick is
exactly.
like.
Number 7 again.
Over and over. And over. But okay, so to that end, we've been thinking, okay, Otto Porter Jr., $28.5 million, you're locked into that deal. Mm-hmm. How do you rotate around that? There wasn't a ton of money to go around, but you can creatively work in another perhaps big contract. So previously, we all thought that might not be the case. This was going to be the iteration of the Bulls roster for at least another season. But free agent-wise, we might have some movement there. Mm. So the question is, how does that make the draft come back around?
Mm. Yeah, no, one thing I'm very curious, though, because here in Chicago, we know the only way to really build this team is going through the draft, and no free agents, big-time free agents has ever come here, really. Dennis Rodman was traded. That was really about it. So one thing I'm really interested to see, Arturas definitely has his hands overseas, but does this kind of open up the eyes to a lot of big-name free agents here in the States? And obviously in the NBA, you have Anthony Davis, you have a Giannis, you have a Jokic. Maybe those guys look at AK. It's like, you know what? Things are different in Chicago. No more guard foreman. What do you think about that? Do you think it's going to his hiring is going to put a better view on an organization as a whole to bring in some of those big-time free agents?
Bulls have had 2 GMs in their history prior to this?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. This will change it, absolutely. How it changes how the free agents view it, who wants to be the first big guy possibly to come here in free agency, that's the question you're going to ask. What are the relationships? Everybody compliments AK's relationships, it seems like. That's one of his real strengths, is building relationships, whether it's through scouting, whether it's through socializing, whether it's through power lunches and dinners. Like, he knows all the right things. He's worked with a lot of teams. So he's got that base. He's a known commodity. Players respect him. Coaches and teammates respect him. Front office people respect him. So how is he going to bring that over, and how is it going to benefit this Bulls team? Because that was the group think, right? We all thought nobody wants to stand in the shadow of the guy who's got the statue in the atrium. Nobody wants to come here. It's cold weather city. It's Eastern Conference, this and that. 2 GMs in the team's history before this. This is going to change it. It's just a matter of how. Are those arguments going to still ring true? We don't know. We just don't know. It's safe to say that things are going to change. The Bulls didn't do this for no reason. They didn't bring a guy from the outside for no reason. That, to me, is the most significant piece of this. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to think that free agents are going to respect that too. Agents are going to respect that too.
Leila, look, let's get a little personal here. No, but look, this is primarily, as far as you being the Bulls reporter, this was your first season, and I'm sorry it ended abruptly, but how did this season go? How was the experience for you?
It was good. I think there were a lot of good moments from it. I'd been an NBA reporter before with the Houston Rockets, so that was a lot of fun, as you can imagine. That was a team with James Harden, Pat Beverly, and Dwight Howard, Chandler Parsons. There were a lot of personalities there. I've covered the Bulls a bit for NBC Sports Chicago, like when I first got here. Mm-hmm. One of my takeaways were pretty interesting because of not just the conversations that you have with people who are on the team, but the conversations with people all around it. Like, I got to talk to Kendrick Nunn a bit when he was here, when he came in with the Miami Heat. You get to talk to Bobby Portis, see how he's doing. You get to talk to former Bulls, Chicago people. All-Star was an amazing experience. I'm thankful we got to have it.
Yeah.
That's a month later, the world has changed, a month after the All-Star game. So for me, it was a great experience, but it was also about learning too. And just talking to Luol Deng, I took so much away from that. We talked to Joakim Noah before he signed with the Clippers. I talked to Nazr Mohammed too, who I think would make such a great executive.
Yeah, another name out there.
Ranks. Yeah, I loved that Nazr Mohammed's name was out there. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, on a personal level, you're in the NBA. You're covering the Chicago Bulls. You can't complain about that.
Right.
But I always say it takes a year to get used to something. Like, your second season is going to be so much better than your first. So we wait, and we will see what happens when the time comes. But I'm looking forward to all the changes to see what happens.
Oh, you did real well.
Yeah, you did. Love
you did
watching
real
the
well.
games.
You did real well. Even going back to all the way back to you catching Coach K when you had Kobe White. Not Coach K, Williams,
Roy.
and Roy
Yeah,
Williams coming over. Like you did well this season. Hats off to you. All right,
Thanks.
go ahead.
Okay,
Z.
okay, real quick. I wanted to kind of stay on a personal thing, but more so with the profession. Just saw today, I believe the mayor of Los Angeles said he doesn't think sports is going to happen until 2021. I think the same thing in New York. You have those two states with multiple teams in every profession there. What is your thoughts on that? The simple fact of typically the way California goes, the way the country goes, and here in Chicago, it's multiple teams here, obviously in multiple leagues. What do you think? What do you think about all that?
Well, DeMont, I think you're right. I think California sets the tone. They were the first ones to enact the shelter-in-place order, and then we moved on second in Illinois. Mm-hmm. But they might mean that when it comes to fans in the stands. Mm. I think they're trying to tell people realistic timelines.
Yeah.
Dr. Fauci said today in a Snapchat interview that got picked up by a lot of places, including ESPN, we have an article on it as well, that he thinks that if sports happen this year, they're going to happen without fans. And I think that's something we've all resigned ourselves to thinking. But, he's right. The virus sets the timeline. We can't anticipate this because I hate to say it, be a broken record, but it's never happened before. I think there are people working on it. We all want to see a game happen somehow, but safety is the most important thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Dan Davis, we have Leila Rahimi on with us right now from NBC Sports Chicago. Leila, you just brought up something that just triggered something in my head. So let's just say sports will come back and the stands are empty. And we've heard a lot about players and team members and maybe even families being put in confinement, but you're a reporter. So you've had to think about, to a certain degree, well, what happens if sports come back? And what if I have to be, for your interactions with said players, put in confinement? And how has NBC perhaps even talked to you guys about what may happen if sports do return and how you guys are going to have to be either kept away or still have access to the players?
We're still in a very wait-and-see mode. We're all still working from home and doing the best we can to just bring the content. And there is so much to be brought to everybody. I think it's a situation where if one decision gets made, then other decisions will start to fall into place as to how they will be made. Do you travel somebody? How is that person going to live? And how are they going to exist in this space if this all works out the way you want it to? So much of what we do is based on what the teams do first. And then we're going to figure out what the situation is in place to go from there. I think the bottom line is we all just try to stay safe.
Yeah.
For baseball season, primarily what I do is in the studio. So I haven't traveled with a team in a long time. And most of what I've done has been in the studio. But Chuck Garfine's the field reporter for the White Sox. So if Chuck goes out there, how does that affect things?
All right.
Does Chuck go out there? Do they have reporters? Those are questions that we can't answer yet because we just don't know what the exact plan is going to be yet.
So what have you been doing in the lockdown to keep yourself from going stir crazy?
Well, I've been looking out the window a lot. Thankfully working a lot. We've got a lot of shows on NBC Sports Chicago on our social media too. Mm-hmm. And this Bulls news has kept me busy. So that's the biggest thing is I find myself just glued to the internet, glued to my apps more just because you don't know what news is coming down the line. I did watch Tiger King.
I'm 2 episodes in.
I only watched the first episode. I was like, I've seen enough.
So the reason I watched it is because Wynnewood, Oklahoma, the site of that zoo, is part of the coverage area of one of my old stations. And the reason I never went to the zoo.
Sure you didn't, Leila.
No, because I was in sports, so I didn't have to do that. So I used to shoot with a big TV camera. Mm-hmm. And one of my jobs as a sports reporter was to go to almost every high school you can practically think of. It was a small town, small market station. So your bread and butter is high school sports. So I've been to Wynnewood, but it was to cover high school football, high school basketball. It wasn't to cover the zoo.
Joe Exotic.
But we definitely had stories about the zoo on our station, and my old boss is in the show Tiger King.
So it was just as crazy hearing it firsthand as everyone's seeing it now.
Yeah, but you know how it is. Like, there's the dramatic rendering of it, like what we saw on Netflix, which I don't blame you for sitting through one or two of those episodes. It was hard to take. But then there's how you talk about it. So, like, you're desensitized to it because you're close to it. So people be like, oh, yeah, that crazy wild animal zoo up in Wynnewood. And then it's funny because there's another place called Arbuckle Wilderness, which is some sort of wildlife something up there where, like, you can supposedly see giraffes from your car.
What the hell's going on in Oklahoma?
We always see commercials for it growing up. And it's somewhere close to Wynnewood. And I'm like, wait, is that the dude from Arbuckle Wilderness? No, that's another exotic animal guy. Oh, my bad.
What?
Yeah, man. You just know these things exist, but you really hadn't looked into it much, or like somebody's already done the story. Or so you know what I'm saying? Like, things happen like that.
Real quick, my last one, and this is for you too, D. How's your sleeping patterns changed? Because I found myself getting up for like around work time before it was 2 hours prior to that. So it's like the whole house kind of wakes up like around 9 now, which is like, oh man, we getting bad right here. But how's your sleeping patterns changed now due to the shelter in place?
They are terrible. They were all over the place before, just because like I work at night. So therefore, I primarily get up a little bit later, but now it's like all over the place. It just depends on what I do. Am I rolling out of bed at 10 o'clock for this conference call? It's pretty much the only thing getting me up in the morning, and I stay up way too late. It's terrible. My sleeping patterns are terrible. Like, I've had friends text me like, why were you tweeting at 2 a.m.? I'm not drinking. I'm just up that late for no good reason. Like, I have turned into a college student.
Right.
Minus the fun parts. Like,
yeah, I know, right?
Like, but with the ramen.
Oh, no.
I shouldn't be confessing to this.
No.
I say it out loud.
No, not the ramen.
I cooked some legitimate dinners, but did I buy a 6-pack of ramen just in case?
Oh, for sure.
I did.
Just in case. Listen, I know mine. Our schedule hasn't changed that much because we have Grace, and she has to still get up, and she has to do her schoolwork, and Chanel's a teacher, so she has to be online. But yeah, once before, Ken, you're right. I would roll out about maybe 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock. But now it's like I got to log in at 8 o'clock. It's 7:45.
Y'all gotta start being my alarm. Like, I need texts from you guys at a legitimate hour because I am disappointing myself. Like, if I wake up at 8 or 9, I'm doing okay. But I haven't been sleeping a lot. I don't know about you guys. But
I'm with you.
I haven't had good sleep with this.
Yeah, I've always been kind of a night owl, but it's whatever. But one thing before we let you go, the verses, all the Instagram verses, we've been going back and forth on IG talking about that. So
yes,
what's been your favorite so far?
As far as Bible verses, I'd have to say there was one from. Is that what you're talking about? You're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the battles, the IG battles.
The Bible is more important. What Bible verses did the reference?
I'm like, well, my bad. I'm so sorry.
No, don't worry about it.
What happens when you talk to somebody too much on Instagram? We cover around. No, because my latest post was something about Easter where I thought.
Yeah, it was a good one. It was, yes.
Wasn't my words, was somebody else's. Okay, so the battles. Yeah. First of all, I'm still partial to the original from Hot 97, Just Blaze and Swiss Beats. Just Blaze, Swiss Beats to me was like the OG because nobody was doing it at the time. I did love T-Pain, and you caught me on that one. You were the one who informed me. T-Pain and Lil Jon.
Lil Jon, yeah.
And you know what the best part about it was? T-Pain, King of Auto-Tune, sounded exactly like he does on records.
Oh, like, yeah.
Why are you using Auto-Tune? You don't even need it.
Have you seen this Tiny Desk concert?
Well, no. I've seen Lizzo's, which was really
good. I'm gonna send you the link. I'm gonna send you the link to the T-Pains. I think it's the most watched Tiny Desk of all time.
But so I was really disappointed because they didn't play Bia Bia.
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
I feel you on that one. I do like a little B.I.B.I. in my battle. I must admit that.
I can't say it so normal.
Right.
I hear the piano in my mind right now. Yeah, that was probably my favorite out of all of them, and I don't know why, but D-Nice has been amazing too.
Yeah.
His are just the comments. You're there for the comments, you know?
Yeah, who's all in there? No doubt.
Leila, we want your family and everybody else to be safe. We hope if anybody has been infected, that they are healed by now. Please look out and be safe, and we definitely appreciate you for joining us today.
Well, my same wish to you guys, of course. That's number one. Be well, be safe, and let's all try to keep just moving through this as best we can.
That's right. And things open up a little bit in the future, we got to definitely have you on again, all right?
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right. Leila Rahimi, NBC Sports reporter, anchor, host, NBC Sports Chicago. Make sure you follow her on Twitter at Leila Rahimi. Leila, thank you.